think about the word family. What picture pops into your head?
Yeah, it's often that classic image, isn't it? Maybe, two parents, couple of kids.
Exactly. But when you look around today, that image feels, well, it feels like just one part of a much bigger, more complex picture.
It really does. What we even mean by family, that whole concept, seems to be shifting right under our feet.
It feels like it's constantly changing.
Absolutely. That traditional idea, the nuclear family, it's still around, of course, but it's definitely not the only way people are building their lives or, raising kids anymore.
We seem to be right in the middle of a huge transformation in how we form those really close, intimate bonds.
We really are.
Okay, so let's try and unpack this. For this deep dive, we've gathered quite a bit of research
Yeah, some really fascinating stuff. Sociological studies from Europe, Australia.
and even a broader global look at how family systems are changing.
Right.
So our mission today really is to take all that information, boil it down, and give you a clear sense of the big trends.
And maybe some surprising insights, too, hopefully.
Yeah, exactly. Without getting bogged down in like heavy academic jargon.
Think of it as your quick guide to understanding the major shifts happening with families today.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So where do we even start? The definition itself seems tricky.
It really is. That's one of the first things that jumps out from the research. One source we looked at, Krauss, even questions if the term family is becoming almost too broad.
Too broad. How so?
Well, because there are so many internal variations now, so much diversity within what we call family, that maybe the original sort of core meaning is getting a bit lost or vague.
Huh. It's like trying to pin down jelly, maybe.
Sort of, yeah. But, okay, even with that difficulty, we do have some working definitions.
Right, like official ones.
Exactly. The Australian Bureau of Statistics, for instance, they define a family based on relationships, blood, marriage, even common law, adoption, step-families, fostering.
Okay.
And the key thing for them is usually that these individuals live together in the same household.
Gotcha. So co-residence is important there. What did their data show?
Well, looking back at 2012-13 data, couple families were the big majority. That's couples with kids and couples without kids.
Making up most families.
Yeah, around 85%. Then you had one-parent families making up about 14%, and a small slice were other family types.
Okay, but here's where it gets really interesting, right? The projection.
Yes. This is pretty striking. The same source, Relationships Australia, predicted that pretty soon, sometime between like 2023 and 2029, childless couple families might actually become the most common family type in Australia.
Wow. More common than couples with children.
That's the prediction. It suggests a potentially big shift in, why people partner up, maybe less about primarily raising kids and more about the partnership itself.
That's a huge potential change. It really speaks to that increasing diversity you mentioned.
It absolutely does. And, definitions can be even broader. Schneewin, who Krauss cites, talks about family as a kind of intimate relational system. It can span generations or be within one generation. And crucially, it explicitly includes unmarried couples.
So it's less about legal ties or living together and more about those deep connections.
Exactly. Which probably feels more true to how a lot of people experience family these days.
Yeah, that resonates.
Definitely. But it's also crucial to remember that even these broader definitions don't always capture everything.
That's so.
Well, Morphy, who's mentioned in the Relationships Australia info, points out the challenge of applying these standard definitions to, say, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander families.
Ah, because their kinship systems are different.
Exactly. They operate with different terms, different understandings of connection and obligation compared to the sort of Anglo-Celtic model these definitions often assume.
That's a really important point. Culture shapes so much of this.
Mm.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Thinking historically and looking at Europe.
Right.
Our source from Krauss mentions Eveline Sollerot's work on post-WWII European families. She saw it happening in stages.
That's right. 3 phases. After the war, Sollerot saw this initial period of almost like a family renaissance.
A comeback.
Kind of. Marriage rates went up, people got married younger. And this was pretty widespread across Europe, interestingly, even across the Iron Curtain.
Huh. But that didn't last.
No. The second phase saw the family's positions start to weaken a bit. Society, the state, started taking over functions that families used to handle almost exclusively.
Like what? Welfare? Healthcare?
Yeah, things like that. and even taking a bigger role in, raising children.
Yeah.
Sillerat linked this to a bigger shift towards individualism, the individual rather than the family unit becoming the main focus of society, driven partly by, increasing emancipation for different groups.
And that led to...
Well, it contributed to marriage rates and birth rates starting to fall while divorce rates began to climb.
Okay. And then there was that Sambo thing in Sweden. Cohabitation.
Ah, yes. Living together before marriage, there was this initial quite strong belief, almost a national pride thing in Sweden, that this would lead to better marriages.
Like a trial run. To make sure it works.
Exactly. The thinking was it would filter out incompatible couples and ultimately lower divorce rates.
But I sense a but coming.
You sense correctly, the reality didn't quite match the hype, it seems.
Wow.
Later trends showed that these cohabiting relationships, unmarried ones, actually broke up more often than marriages.
Really? So the opposite effect.
Kind of, yeah.
Right.
And this, in turn, led to more kids being born outside of marriage and a rise in single-mother households.
Which brings us to Ulrich Beck's idea.
Right. Beck, also in the Crass Source, basically argues that this tension, the collision between our deep desires for love and family, and our simultaneous push for individual freedom and self-fulfillment is like a central problem in modern life.
A fundamental conflict.
Pretty much. He even suggests modern society is fundamentally a society of individuals, not families, which, really pushes back against that traditional view of family as the bedrock of everything.
Wow. Okay, that constant push and pull between me and we seems like a major driver of all this change. Let's zoom out again. The global picture.
Yeah.
What are the big trends worldwide?
Well, our source from Furstenberg talks about William Good's theory from way back in the mid-60s.
Okay.
Good predicted this global shift towards what he called the conjugal household. Basically, the nuclear family model, married couple, their kids, own home.
And he thought this would spread everywhere. Why?
He linked it heavily to the spread of market capitalism, the idea that industrialization and market economies favored that kind of smaller, more mobile family unit.
And did his prediction hold up? Did the nuclear family take over the world?
Yes and no. It's complicated. Good definitely spotted some key trends that did happen in many places.
Like what?
Like the average age people get married for the first time has gone up in most countries.
Okay, people marrying later.
Right. And fertility rates, the number of children people are having have generally declined worldwide, though there are definitely regional exceptions, places where rates are still high.
What about living together, cohabitation? Is that global too?
Oh, absolutely. That's a huge trend, Furstenberg highlights. It's much more common globally now, both as a step before marriage and sometimes as an alternative to it.
And not just a Western thing.
Not at all. It's actually got a really long history in places like Latin America and the Caribbean, for example. It's not new everywhere.
Interesting. What else is happening globally? Divorce? Childlessness?
Yeah, those are part of the picture, too. Divorce rates are up in many, many nations.
Unfortunately.
Indeed. And we're also seeing more people choosing not to have children or having fewer children, leading to rising childlessness, especially in wealthier nations, and also notably in East Asia.
And you can link that too.
Various factors, but certainly things like women having more access to education and careers play a big role.
Which leads us to another massive global change. Women in the workforce.
Huge. Absolutely huge. The massive increase in women working outside the home has inevitably shaken up traditional gender roles within families everywhere.
Makes sense.
And alongside these structural economic shifts, you also see changing attitudes. More acceptance generally of things like sex before marriage or having children outside of marriage.
But are those relationships as stable?
That's a key point Furstenberg makes. While acceptance is growing, the data tends to show that non-marital unions, especially those involving kids, are often less stable than marriages.
So it's this really complex mix. Economic forces, changing values, individual choices, all reshaping families across the planet.
Exactly. It's not just one thing.
What specific drivers do the sources point to? What's really pushing these changes?
Furstenberg gives a pretty comprehensive list. Economic development is a big one, obviously. Urbanization, people moving to cities.
Right.
Technological changes. I mean, think about social media's impact alone.
Yeah, huge.
Then there are shifts in cultural values, that individualism we talked about, but also the push for gender equality.
Laws and policies must matter too.
Definitely. Legal changes around marriage, divorce, parental rights,
Yeah.
they all play a part. And even things like demographic pressures, like aging populations, it's a whole web of interconnected factors.
And it's not just about money or jobs.
Right.
You mentioned values changing on their own.
Precisely. This idea of ideational change. Thinkers like Weber or Coley and Watkins or Engelhart Furstenberg cites them argue that shifts in culture, beliefs, preferences for autonomy. These can be independent forces.
So ideas themselves can drive change.
Yeah, sometimes they might even come before the economic shifts or influence how those shifts play out. And education is a massive channel for this.
Oh, so?
Education opens doors, right? It provides paths for social mobility, but it also often exposes people to different ideas, challenging more traditional family norms and practices.
Okay, so we have this picture of massive global transformation in family life. But there's a darker side emerging too, isn't there? Something about inequality.
Yes, this is a really crucial and quite concerning aspect discussed by Furstenberg. There seems to be a growing stratification within family systems.
Gratification, meaning like layers,
Yeah.
different levels.
Exactly. Linked strongly to rising economic inequality, especially in advanced economies. Basically, the kind of family you grow up in and how your parents raise you can have increasingly different and lasting impacts on your life chances.
Depending on your parents' socioeconomic status.
Precisely. The opportunities you get, the path your life takes, it's becoming more tied to the family circumstances you start out with.
Can you give some examples of how that plays out?
Sure. We see these diverging trends. For instance, people with more education are now more likely to get married before having kids, whereas those with fewer economic resources might be more likely to have children earlier, perhaps outside of marriage. And unfortunately, this pattern can sometimes lock families into cycles of economic and social disadvantage.
And parenting styles differ too.
Yeah, research by Leroux, who Furstenberg mentions, talks about this idea of concerted cultivation among more affluent families.
Concerted cultivation, what's that?
It's like this active focus on developing a child's talents, reasoning skills, involving them in organized activities, negotiating with institutions like schools,
Okay.
which contrasts with different patterns often seen in lower-income families, sometimes described as focusing more on natural growth. These different approaches can really impact things like how well kids do in school and their future careers.
Wow. And what about having kids with different partners? Does that factor in?
That's another point raised the potential impact of multi-partner childbearing. It can sometimes complicate things like parental investment, time, resources available for each child, potentially affecting their well-being.
Gosh, so the family structure itself can either amplify existing inequalities or maybe help buffer against them.
It seems that way, yes. The family context is becoming an increasingly important factor in social stratification.
Okay, let's bring it back to that original idea we started with the nuclear family.
Mm-hmm.
Our source from BetterHelp talks about modernizing that concept. What do they mean by that?
Essentially, it means widening the lens, moving beyond that very specific traditional image to heterosexual parents, their biological kids, all under one roof as the only valid definition of family.
So accepting and including all the other forms we see today.
Exactly. Acknowledging and valuing single-parent families, blended families.
Blended families being where parents bring children from previous relationships together.
Right. And same-sex parent families, families built through adoption or fostering. It's about recognizing all these as legitimate, functioning family units.
And single-parent families, for instance.
Yeah.
They're much more common now.
Definitely. Due to divorce, separation, sometimes individual choice. And the key point BetterHelp makes, so based on research, is that while single parents might face specific challenges, financial, time pressures, they're absolutely capable of raising happy, well-adjusted kids.
It's not the structure itself that dictates success.
Precisely. Same goes for blended families, which obviously have their own unique dynamics and complexities in bringing different family cultures together.
And same-sex parents.
Again, growing visibility, growing acceptance. And study after study shows children raised by same-sex parents do just as well in terms of emotional well-being, development, all that stuff, as kids raised by heterosexual parents.
So the takeaway really seems to be that the quality of the relationships inside the family matters more than the specific form it takes.
That's the core message from BetterHelp. Family cohesion, that sense of support, love, stability, that's what's truly crucial for health and well-being, much more than whether it fits a particular structural mold.
What are the upsides of thinking this way, of modernizing the definition?
Well, greater inclusiveness, for one. When society recognizes and validates diverse families, it can lead to better support systems, better legal protections,
Which helps everyone involved.
right, parents and kids. But as BetterHelp also notes, it's not always smooth sailing. There can be resistance to change, prejudice, discrimination still exists.
Of course, it's a work in progress.
Definitely.
Okay, this has been a lot to cover. So for you, the listener, tuning in, what are the absolute key takeaways from this deep dive? What should you remember?
I think three main things stand out. First, just the sheer diversity of family structures today all around the world. It's not monolithic.
Right, variety is key.
Second, how much these changes are driven by big economic and social forces, capitalism, individualism, gender equality shifts.
They don't happen in a vacuum.
Not at all. And third, that concerning trend of growing inequalities, how different family forms are linked to socioeconomic status and life chances.
Yeah, that's sobering.
And maybe the overarching point is that family, the definition itself, is dynamic. It's fluid, it's evolving, and it's becoming generally more inclusive.
And a surprising nugget, something that really jumped out.
For me, maybe that Australian prediction, the idea that childless couples could become the most common family type, that really flips the traditional script.
Yeah, that one stuck with me too. Or maybe the story from Sweden.
Oh, right. The initial optimism about cohabitation leading to super stable marriages.
And then the data showing, oops, maybe not.
Exactly. Those kinds of unexpected twists really show how complex these changes are. We don't always predict them accurately.
So why should you, listening now, care about all this? What's the relevance?
Well, understanding these big shifts gives you context, doesn't it? For your own life, your own relationships.
Whether that's your family of origin, the family you're building, or even just understanding friends and colleagues.
Right. And it helps make sense of broader society, why things are changing, the debates we're having about family values or support policies.
It provides a kind of framework for understanding the world around us.
Exactly. And it pushes us to think about how well our current systems, legal, social, community support, are actually serving all the different kinds of families that exist now. Are they keeping up?
Which leads nicely into a final thought for you to chew on.
Go for it.
As family keeps evolving, what do you think are the absolute essentials? What truly makes a family supportive, thriving in today's world? Forget the structure for a moment. What's at the core?
That's a great question. Or maybe think about it this way. Given all this diversity, how do our societies need to adapt? What kind of support systems do we need to build so that all families, whatever they look like, have the best chance to flourish?
Definitely some important things to ponder
Yeah.
long after this deep dive is over.
Yeah.